Hey guys, it's Valkrin. Welcome to my guide video to patch 4.11. And what I do with these guide videos is once a patch has been out for a while, I kind of accumulate all the knowledge and everything I kind of figured out during the patch and put it into a video and discuss it sort of in the format of like what the patch notes were, what it really translated into becoming. And let's go through the topics to begin with. We're going to talk about the snowballing changes that was supposedly in the patch notes and talking about changes to the turrets and stuff like that. That'll be the first topic. Second topic will be about the Nitta Lee changes, more about that. Jax and the Kayle changes. Will they return at a later date or are they gone forever? The item changes, and lastly, how does the Ancient Golem affect the jungle? And let's start with the snowballing. So with the patch notes to patch 4.11, one of the things Riot talked about was them trying to revert back some of the anti-snowballing things they did. And, you know, changing the bounty reward system, how that worked, that definitely kind of is a 1 point in favor of snowballing. Because previously, if you were snowballing and you gave up a massive bounty, it was almost a point for anti-snowballing. But what they did that, you know, indirectly makes the game much harder to snowball through is buffing turrets. And honestly, the changes to the turrets really put a massive damper on snowballing. It really does. It becomes much, much harder to tower dive right now. And in all honesty, the losing team in any bracket of play typically has been making a lot more comebacks this patch. I don't really have stats to back that up, but I've felt that in my games and the games that I've watched my friends play in lower brackets of play. One team that's behind early on, if they utilize the tower as if it was a six-man, a really fed sixth member to the team, and they defend the turret and the enemy team tries to make a dive or gets caught close to the turret, the defending team usually wins right now, and it's ridiculous, but that's just the state of the game. Really difficult to dive early game. Once one team figures out they can kind of turtle, they will they'll be okay with letting the game just progress to late game. And the other big change was the experience range increase. Now this is a huge point in anti-snowballing because it's so ridiculously difficult to zone someone from getting experience now. I mean, previously it was still kind of difficult unless you were just completely smashing lane. But now, even if you're zoning them like out of a range of your abilities, they will typically still be able to get experience, and that is a big point for anti-snowballing. And when the game kind of progresses to the point where it's much more anti-snowball based, then you see more late game picks. And this patch has seen a lot of Kog'Maw picks and a lot of champions that are late game based, and that's just because it's so much easier now to just kind of turtle up and make it to late game. Now the Nidalee changes, I thought Nidalee was pretty powerful before this patch, in all honesty. She's got ridiculous execute damage. The multiplier in her execute when they're hunted is absolutely insane. It has a very high AD ratio, it has an AP ratio to it. Her early game only got stronger through the remake on Nidalee because you can use cat form earlier, you can kind of hop around. The gap closing when you hit a target with your spear or they're hunted, 750 leap range, that's pretty ridiculous. The major the cons to Nidalee right now, though, are that she is a very high skill cap champion because if you're not able to hit your spears, which are harder to land now, then you're missing out on a huge, huge component of her kit. Her gap closing ability and her execute damage will be significantly hindered. And also the other big change is her traps aren't nearly as good as they used to be. The old Nidalee traps were just insane. And so that one ability got way, way weaker for sure. But overall, I definitely agree that Nidalee is one of, in the strongest tier for top laners. You can even play Nidalee mid, but she's definitely a top laner right now. Now, we'll talk about Kayle and Jax. They were really, really dominant in the previous patch. Will they be gone forever? No, I don't think so. Well, for one thing, they hit Jax with the early game HP and the HP per level, but Jax is still Jax, and he probably won't be seen a whole lot in the next couple patches unless they change some other things that'll bring him back in flavor, but he's still in the game. He's still a strong pick because they didn't touch his damage, and that was a big part of why Jax was so powerful, is he does a ridiculous amount of AD and AP damage, making it really hard to itemize against early in the game, and his scaling is ridiculously high. Now, the changes to Kayle were a little bit different. I think that Kayle's ultimate is still ridiculously powerful. I mean, hitting the cooldown on it, it doesn't matter as much as the fact that it still works the same way. Now, AP Kayle definitely got a massive hit, but we can't forget that Kayle does have AD ratios on the Q and E as well. So while AP Kayle is a little bit weaker, and by a little bit probably more significant than I'm really letting on, but you can still play AP Kayle, but also keep in mind that AD Kayle is a thing. I still think that there are a couple diehard high elo Kayle players that are still having success because you still have Kayle's utility. It's just there's a big damage cut to the AP ratio and the E, so the scaling on Kayle is a little bit weaker in terms of damage. But the main topic for this one is simply, once a champion's nerfed, the community kind of just says, you know, they're gone forever. They're underplayed, or they're going to be underplayed because they're trashed or they're terrible. And that's just not true. The changes to Jax and Kayle, they were, you know, significantly powerful champions before. While they're not going to be favorable because there were other things that were buffed and changed, they're still in the game. They're still decently strong picks comparatively to other champions in the game. Now, the item changes. The Hunter's Machete changes was indirectly a pretty big nerf to AP junglers. It's just a really bad item to take on something like Fiddlesticks early game. It was not the best before, but now it just especially becomes really, really not a thing that you want to work towards or start with. Now, Quill Coat, I really like this item for a few reasons, and it does give you that nice early item for a tank that helps you clear the jungle, and it gives you an extra ward. But the main problem with it is that the sustain is static on Quill Coat, which, you know, anything that's static, you can kind of tell that if it isn't going to benefit you enough early game to translate that into an advantage later, then it's just, you know, it's going to become useless later anyways. That's anything early game based. And Ancient Golem, the thing I didn't even include on this is, like, the main reason why Ancient Golem is like a really strong item right now is because of the passive that gives you 25% bonus, or 25% extra health based on your bonus health, and that is huge. But the other components of Ancient Golem compared to the other jungle items, the sustain is static. You know, Spirit Stone, Elder Lizard, Spectral Wraith, all of those items do increase percentage-based damage, and the sustain is percentage-based. So as the game scales on, you know, they only get better and better according to the damage you do, etc., etc. But Ancient Golem, the sustain is static, so something like that, it's going to fall off really hard comparatively. And that kind of brings us to the next topic of talking more specifically about Ancient Golem. Now, will this completely reinvigorate tanks? Now, Maokai received some changes, so I guess I'll talk about Maokai now. I like the changes to Maokai, but it doesn't necessarily fix the problems that were with the tank junglers. And that's the fact that, you know, for the first part, tank junglers have a very slow clear time still. I mean, Ancient Golem helps it out a little bit early game, but it's still going to be way slower than something like a Lee Sin or Elise. And Elise and Elise are very, very well rounded. And there are even other jungle choices like Xin Zhao that are still pretty powerful in terms of early game based junglers in lower brackets of play. The other aspect of this is the fact that tank junglers don't have duelist pressure. You're not afraid of a Maokai invading on you, really, compared to something like a Lee Sin or Elise or Xin Zhao or Shaco, anything that you would consider a quote-unquote carry jungler. Carry junglers have the duelist power, tanks don't. So you're not really afraid of a tank just kind of walking into your jungle and fighting you, because that's not how they're designed. And the last component, this is really true. Especially for the new remake to Maokai. I really like the remake to the Maokai, except the fact that you're incredibly dependent on your allies because you have such little damage. So even if you get really far ahead on a tank jungler, you can still easily lose that game because your damage is not going to spike up like a carry jungler's would if you were to get ahead early game, and you still kind of suffer with the fact that you can't duel people. To make kills happen, your team needs to kind of be really effective, and that's something you can't always depend on in solo queue. So those were the main three topics of why tank junglers right now, even though the Ancient Golem is a pretty good item, they're not necessarily going to be really, really potent in solo queue. You can still definitely win games with them. There's situations where Maokai jungle is amazing, But these three main points are kind of why Lee Sin, Elise, and other carry junglers are just pretty much more effective right now. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to follow my social media. If you want to participate with my weekly coaching giveaways, then follow my Twitter, Facebook, and of course my stream, which is what I do the weekly coaching giveaways on. And lastly, guys, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like my content. And I'll see you guys for my next video, which will be the God tier of patch 4.11.